Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly, sponsored by SignalWire. This week, we have Gavin Henry, founder of the SentryPeer open source project and CIO at Telco Switch, which recently acquired his previous company. What was the name of the previous company? You were at
Sure, VoIP.
SureVoIP, right? Cool. So, thank you for joining us. It's been you've been a friend of ClueCon Weekly before, and it's nice to have you back. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure.
So, would you like to give us a quick intro about yourself, what you do, and we can delve into what SentryPeer is, which is a very interesting project, in my opinion?
Thank you. Yeah, sure. So, as you said, my name's Gavin Henry. I'm the ripe old age of 43 now, and I'm now CIO of Telco Switch, who are a much bigger telecoms company than Sure VoIP, and acquired the business and all the intellectual property, software, everything July last year. So it's just coming up for pretty close for a year for that. And big up to them. It's been a great experience. They're probably more than 10 times bigger than us, so it's really nice working in a company that's got a professional sales team, a professional support team, finance team. Whereas we're just a small business of 7 people, so it's great being part of that type of thing. Um, so that's what I'm up to at the moment. But on the back of all that, in my spare time, of what I've managed to conjure up, spare time that is, I've had this idea of um, essentially a honeypot, um, to harvest data and build these lists of IP addresses and phone numbers that you can use um, within a network, a internet telephony service provider, or as a person, running your own phone system or a small business. Because there's a few systems out there that you can pay for the information, but I thought, if you're running the stuff yourself, as we all know, as free switch users, we like to run things ourselves and make sure we know what's going on. So I had this idea burning in the back of my head for probably a year or two, um, and then I just decided to give it a shot and see where I went. So if you've got a couple of minutes, I can bore everyone to death a little bit about it.
No, I think it will be super interesting.
Present my
I'll
screen.
get into why I think this kind of project is super important after you show us a little bit more, but I think this is super interesting. So, if you have any slides you'd like to present, or however you
Okay,
like to do it.
I'll just share a screen. We've covered the first bit. My passion is software and software engineering. I'm a volunteer podcast host on the Software Engineering Radio. That's been going. We've just done our 500th episode, one of the
Oh,
oldest technical podcasts that's lasted this long. And the next show is one I did with Daniel Stenberg, the founder of Curl Project, and that was a really good time spent chatting for about 70 minutes on the past 25 years of looking after Curl and developing it. So that should be out
wow.
this week. And that was great fun. It's one of the few open source projects in the world that's got code on Mars.
Oh,
Not
really?
many projects can say that. Yeah, it's very exciting. He'll tell you
Well,
all
I can
about
see
it.
that curl is everywhere, so it's not surprising if you think about it.
Exactly. Um, so yeah, what is SentryPeer? There's this idea I've had, that any sort of creators or designers of things know and understand that once you get an idea in your head, it's very hard to get rid of it until you follow it and discover it doesn't work. So it's something that I've been burning in the back of my head for a while, and um, I wanted to do it in C, which I'll touch upon in a little bit. Pretty much because all the software that I use every day is in C, free switch, and I just know the longevity of that is always a good choice. And I want to get my teeth into something. But it's a side project. It's nothing to do with SureVoIP or Telco Switch. I do plan to use it within the business, um, but it's a personal project at the moment. But it's fundamentally a way to harvest IP addresses of bad actors on the internet and phone numbers. That's the main thing, to get the phone numbers that they try to call or use as a sort of probing type of number, And then once you've got that data, you can consume it or display it any way that works for you. Could be like a breakdown of the SIP agents, the countries things are coming from, the time of days they do these, the patterns of what leads up to an actual full-blown phone call attempt, loads of different ways. And then, if you've got the raw data, you should be able to consume that any way that you like. I've made some decisions of what I think is useful, but it's an open source project hosted on GitHub, so you can do anything you want. But the key bit for me was to share that information. So if we've got what you call a node sucking in this stuff, the IP addresses, numbers, if you join the pot of data, you should be able to get other bits of information that people have collected and also share yours, so it builds up this global list of information. So that was the idea. Came up with a name by looking at telecoms on Wikipedia and security, and then just picking some words that sounded nice together. So it's all open source. You own the data. You can opt in to share that data. The peer-to-peer part is driven by OpenDHT, which is a distributed hash table, which is like the backbone of BitTorrent and file sharing. But you have to switch that on. That's not on by default. So if you want to run it standalone and just collect information for your own use, that's fine. But to get other people's data, you need to switch it on. Hence why you can only receive or share once you've put that on. I spent a lot of analysis paralysis on the right language to use and things, but went with my heart and went with C. And using the Auto Tools project that's been around for a long time was a really good decision because it makes packaging and anything else very simple because it's all there and it's decisions I don't need to think about. Um, and the goal really was to make it a project that lasts with the longevity, as small as possible, understand every line of code. It uses as less resources as possible, so it could run on a router or a watch or anything, anywhere you want to put this type of thing, and you'd run it. I've already mentioned it's written in C. It was recently adopted by Deutsche Telekom's Honeypot project a couple of weeks ago, February. That was really exciting. I just searched for hashtags on GitHub for honeypots and things like that, and anything that I thought would be a good place to run a node to feed data in to the list or provide it. I just raised a ticket and said, "Oh, I know. Have you come across this? What would be a good way to give you the data?" And it seemed to fit them nicely. They've got they helped me develop the JSON logging so they could consume it and display all the data into their Elk stack, Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. And I've also submitted it to Kali Linux. That was at the very early stages when it was like 0.1 version. But now I just got a message last week that the project is pushing forward with the packaging because they've seen it now and had to play with it. So it should be in there as well. So that saves you compiling it, running a Docker image. You can just grab these ISOs and run the Honeypot project yourself or Kali Linux and do an update.
So it
I've just
generally should be run as its own machine. Or it doesn't matter.
it doesn't really matter. It's really flexible for the deployment topology. So if you're just running it yourself, you can just leave it there, not with peer-to-peer mode on and not responding to SIP packets. You can just take the probes off the network. You have to pass in a flag to actually get it to reply to SIP probes. So until you give a 200 OK or some type of response, you won't get the invites for the phone numbers because it's just, you're not alive at that point. You don't actually get any useful data until you reply. So that depends on the flags you pass, the binary, whether that fits your usage model within the network. But ideally, putting on a public IP with an open firewall, with the right ports open, and joining peer-to-peer mode would be the best way for anyone to use it to get that data. It comes with a RESTful API. and a web GUI. So web GUI is just for display purposes. You'd really consume the data into your own stuff, how you'd see fit. The REST API allows you to list all the IP addresses, how many times they've been seen, when they're last seen with JSON response. You can query an IP address, check if it's been seen or not. So you could use that in your proxies to check whether it's popped up somewhere. But that could be anywhere on the cloud. The real plus point for this is querying a phone number as it comes in to your proxy, and it will return, a 200 OK if it's there, or 404 if it's not. You could use that to be an early warning system for like CD rates or
Yeah.
Kama-Elio or OpenSIPs to not block the fact that the number's there, but the fact that it's being seen and it's potentially
Yeah.
part of an attack. If that's tied down to, say, a customer system or a hosted account, you could get some heads up that there's some type of probes going on. So it should be like some sort of warning trigger. Not that they've been hacked, but there's something within their network that is probing known patterns and numbers and strings. The data all lives in an SQLite database that you could speak to directly and consume yourself. It uses libmicroHTTP, which is the same as the Janus project uses. So I follow their projects a lot. So any plugins they use, I know are good. So there's a lot of similarities there. And it's extremely fast. It's as low as you can go apart from assembly. Maybe my SQL searches could be a bit better, but they're all indexed. So
Yeah, it's not very. To be fair, I've seen that in many of this kind of processes, SQLite is totally fine. We run large scale first versions SQLite without really noticing.
yeah, it's the most deployed database in the world, software as well in the world. It's on everyone's phone and thing. I think there'll be way more problems for SQLite running out of steam than the software I've written. And then I have plans for putting in a very small, tiny SIP proxy, so you could do a SIP dip to get a 302 redirect or a whatever status code to come up with. That's just about in there because I'm using the libsip2 project, which is really good. It's about 20 years old. So part of this was like, oh, I could do a SIP parsing library or something, but I thought, no, I actually want to get this finished. So I'm not going to reinvent certain things. And then one thing I want to explore is a BGP agent. So you could opt to black hole any IP addresses that appear on the proxy, on the node. Obviously doing some checks that they're not your own allocations and they're not key customers and things like that. That's coming. Are you still there?
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah, cool. So this is an actual dashboard that the Deutsche Telekom Teapot open source project did when they integrated SentryPeer. And it saves me all the time of trying to reproduce what Grafana and Elk can do. So you can see the usual, countries of attack, SIP user agents, and that's just from the JSON log file that this is spitting out. So you could just run this through the ISO here. You could opt to switch the peer-to-peer section on here because it's an opt-in. You can imagine these are
That's a nice
distributions.
dashboard too.
Yeah, and I didn't have to do it. I just contributed it to them, and they chop up the data. So yeah, you just feed that in, and then query an IP address or a phone number from your backend. I thought it was really cool. And that's the beauty of using not quite standardized data formats because JSON is JSON, but they steered us on how they wanted it to look, so it should be quite digestible. So moving on to that actual replication part, I did get quite fancy with how I wanted to do this by thinking about raft protocols and um, voting who's going to be a master and trying to get the replication completely watertight and rock solid, but I thought, the replication could just be best effort. If you're online at that point in time, you don't really want to catch up the data to last week because it's probably not very useful.
Of course.
if you're online, you bootstrap the node, which goes to just one central bootstrap node at the moment. But we had a Terraform recipe contributed, so we're going to have some nodes living on all the different public clouds that you can get for free, like a little VM. So you join the distributed hash table. We listen, the SentryPeer binary listens to a certain key, and then any probes that come in, we save it on that key, and then anyone else on that network is listening to it and then just pops it into the JSON log file in the SQLite database. So if you're online, you'll get best effort data, which is pretty instant as far as my testing has gone. And if you're not online, the keys, the values are persistent. So as long as all the bootstrap nodes are on, you should catch up to what's been submitted, and then just build it that way. Because it's only really valid for, it's only really useful for a certain time. You don't need it's not like a blockchain where you need every transaction. So a
Of
lot
course,
of the
yeah.
complication I just binned out and thought, well, this is probably the best way, best ever. It's an open source project, so there's no SLAs on it. And then some more bits about it. It's multi-threaded. There's a syslog output that someone requested and contributed some config for. So as the IP addresses come in, you can put it on like OpenWRT or whatever the latest open source fork of that is, and block at that level. I spent a lot of time on packaging this. So there's an Alpine version, there's a Ubuntu PPA, deb file, Fedora. There's a Docker Hub container, which is probably the easiest way to get the whole lot down, and a homebrew tap as well. And generally it works out that I do a release once a month. So probably tonight or
Well,
tomorrow will be the next one. It's usually slightly new features or moving me along the path. That's what a JSON blob looks like. Just your usual granularity, something unique, a UUID, timestamp, and what was collected. Too much in that. But as anyone that's worked on software will know, it takes a lot to get those 13 lines,
oh, yeah.
into a state. Picking a time format that's, how everyone does it, getting the destination IP of a packet, on UDP can be pretty twisted. And then,
Oh, yeah.
on BSD, Mac, Windows, Linux, and then null data and stuff. So it's been fun. I've really enjoyed it so far. And then the network topology, pretty much everything is a flag that you enable, apart from actually taking a SIP message in. You have to enable replying to a SIP message. Anything dangerous is opt-in, basically.
Mhm.
The old be liberal with what you accept, but stingy with what you return, or what have you. So there's a bootstrapping node. I have spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to not run any infrastructure, but I thought just to move it forward, we'll run a node where people can connect to, and then I'm going to come back to that because there's so many academic papers and all sorts of things. The GNU-net project's really interesting. I've been chatting to them of how to do it, but punching out of UDP systems that aren't public IP and trying to figure out where you are in the world. It's not like just shooting a flare into the sky and somebody sees it, which is an analogy I've been
Yeah.
trying to reproduce. There's things like breadcrumb protocols. There's a lot of interesting things in the military, but they're all designed for LANs and sort of closed cell networks where you can see the traffic. So that's another thing I'm trying to solve, and hopefully do an RFC or something on that. How we
The
do that.
domain based is probably simpler to start with.
Yeah, but again, you need to control the domain, register it, even like
Remember
doing
to keep it.
certificate based. Someone's got to register somewhere. You've got to prove who you are, all that type of thing. So there's loads of, and there's like cyber security attacks of how to outvote things, and there's the web of trust to see whose data is valid and all that type of stuff. It's a very, very exciting, interesting topic, so I'll get back to. But yeah, there's basically anything dangerous you have to switch on, is the bottom line there. And before I even wrote any C code, I did a prototype in Perl because there was a nice Perl proxy project thing that I could use. I just fired it up. It's in the project. You can play with the prototype anytime you want, excuse me. But I'd never switched on SIP on my home IP address. Just fired up that, and within 20 minutes, I started getting probes. And not just
20
from...
minutes on your home address?
Yeah, just, it was
That's
never been
actually,
as
yeah,
domain, nothing at all.
that's
And
a
they were legit.
reasonable time for what's probably an unknown for SIP scanners IP class. Because if you turn it on something like the DigitalOcean or front-facing AWS IPs, it takes about 2 minutes. So 20 minutes
Yeah.
is
So a residential IP address, so it's not in the known lists.
and thinking about it, 20 minutes is actually not very long considering it's residential addresses, which there's no need to scan. So they're
I
probably
wasn't
just,
sitting here for 20 minutes. I came back after making a cup of tea, so it could have been
oh
quicker.
yeah. I
And
think
it
at
was
this
just the
point,
usual.
scanners are just going number by number. Like someone has actually started from 1111 and just moving over to 1112.
Yeah, that's why I
And
think just gathering the IP addresses is useful. But I think the real value is the phone numbers as well if you're a service provider. But there's a lot of intelligence data that you can pull out of
yeah,
these. So that was within 20 minutes. And then because the prototype replied a blanket 200 or whatever, then the system looked alive, and then all the invites came in so fast that my screen couldn't keep up. And that's when I realized I had to write it in something that could cope. But that's just all the numbers coming through, trying one digit after another, so there's already some data there, so I knew it was a good idea. I'm trying to make phone calls. That's a mock-up just now. Most of that bit works, but it's been on the back burner. That's a single page app borrowed from a guy that does a public honeypot online. He donated the layout, and I got it themed up. So I've got that in writing that it's okay to use. And that's pretty much it. I basically started in October, just evenings and weekends, pulling together different things. And then different people have adopted it, other open source projects, and it's been great fun. So hopefully some other people will come along and help build when version 1.4 comes out, because we're at 1.2, that's got, and what's in master, main, the correct way to say it, at the moment is all the peer-to-peer stuff, and it's on Docker Hub. It's got the peer-to-peer bit built in. But when I do version 1.4 sometime this week, that's the full peer-to-peer replication. So if you come online and enable peer-to-peer, you'll get data in from whoever else is running it as well, and build up that list. But you'd be surprised how much data you get in a day. It's quite a lot comes through with phone numbers and tasks, and just get some more users to see what's being useful or not. I've kept it quite slim.
no, it was really, really interesting. So what I was getting to is, and it's something that that's a bit of a question and a bit of a consideration. So I'd like your input on this. There's a lot of work going on around stir shaken
Yeah.
and the signing calls, etc. What I feel like is actually it's not missing, because the shaken part actually is about this. Is that in general, stir and shaken only guarantee a part of the call. They cover different they cover different bases than something like SentryPeer. Because certifying that someone having a certificate, I don't know why there's two of myself, but I'll just remove one of them. Okay, I removed the graph. Okay, well, there's never enough of me, but that's a bit too much. But the Again, the idea there is that stir and shake can cover only part of the protocol in two ways. One, certificates and signatures will be available, but that it's not too hard to get a certificate. Honestly, you can get revoked, you can get flagged, you can get a lot of, but it's not too hard to get something that allows you to sign calls. That's the first consideration. The second is, especially in landlines and mixed mode applications where calls are traveling into the SIP network, back out from some PSTN lag and whatnot. There's a lot that Stir Shaken can't cover. Stir especially can't cover, and databases like this, especially distributed, especially anonymously centralized in a way that allow people to really influence what's going on, are going to be super important. Because I mean, again, I presented about Stir Shaken about a year ago, and this was the main point of the presentation. Like, this will only go so far, and projects like SentryPeer are the missing part. I don't know if you agree with this, but really looks like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting topic because the OpenDHT project that I've been working very closely with, because obviously I've been using them as a library. The C library has only really been used by the Rust plugin within Open. So I've been driving and reporting a lot of bugs and helping out by I packaged OpenDHT for Alpine Linux and Homebrew and things because I needed it. But it means that I've explored its whole API base, and it does have the ability to put signed keys and values on the DHT and encrypted values on the distributed hash table. So there's no reason that if we moved this to more either anonymized or critical information, still under the best effort banner, that you can put on, you could put an encrypted JSON payloads and put whatever you want in it. And there's different flags you can put on to say only I'm allowed to read it because I've signed it. So you still need a way to validate that signature, which comes into the normal sort of certificate-based world. Or you could encrypt it completely for yourself. Have a sort of generic bit of text as the key to fetch. And then when you put things onto the distributed hash table, you can mark them as permanent or expire. It expires after a certain default time. So we put them on permanently, so anyone that comes along can get the rest of the bad actors that have been saved. But there's no reason why it couldn't have a finite lifetime for some of this stuff per phone call, and then they automatically expire. And if you were to use bootstrap.jammy.net, I think, which is OpenDHT became part of the Free Software Foundation and then part of the Ring network, I think. There is a lot of Bootstrap nodes out there already. So if you download OpenDHT and install the command line tool, DHT node, and just run it on port 422, within an hour, you've got 248 other nodes connected to you, all sharing and listening on keys and sharing data, and they could be encrypted or not. So it'd be very easy to move this forward to put their shaken data on it. But then you'd have to move to having some, monitored and critical Bootstrap nodes to be part of it and some proper uptime. But if the packets are signed or encrypted, then you can at least validate those and rotate the keys and things like you normally would with that type of encryption. So you would then need to get into, who puts the certificates, who issues them. So you could still control it, I think, and still have central authorities issuing certificates, and the DHT just becomes a neutral network to put the stuff on,
So
pull
I
them
have a
off.
question for you that comes to mind. When everybody is contributing to your database, ideally, let's say everybody starts using SentryPeer to protect their FreeSwitch systems and other types of subsystems, as you mentioned. What keeps me from adding a competitor's IP address constantly or reporting bad actors purposefully? Just curious. That might be.
Well, so I was hinting at the beginning. The IP addresses are useful to figure out what country and, you know, for, I'd say, sloppy attacks. If they're
Hmm?
coming from IP addresses from that, you can at least use that IP address to say, I've seen this before. I don't think SentryPeer should ever be used as a, an allowed deny list like that for 100%. It should just be used to advise or create notifications or, warnings within your infrastructure. And obviously, whatever's consuming the data, if you see some of your own number allocations or your own, ARIN or RIPE allocations, then you should be checking that. It's not my fault if you use this as a deny list and you log yourself out.
more to
It's
more you'd see it more as maybe a contributor to a kind of scoring system, for example.
yeah, that's what I've been working with a company called CrowdSec, and they've got an open source platform that has more agents. So we had a chat offline about when the peer-to-peer mode comes officially in this, of running a node in their infrastructure, and then it feeds into their intelligence data, and it's exactly that. They like the API ban project as well. Fred
Oh
has
yeah,
opted to
we've had
run.
Fred on.
Yeah, he's opted to run his own nodes that aren't published. Get the IP addresses, and that's similar to what CrowdSec do. When data's fed into them, if it's been seen before the node has, they start to build up a reputation. So when you're consuming their data, it might be that we expand similar in our JSON packets, like Spam House do and the other people. This is a level 2 out of 10 of a trusted node type thing. And then based on your sort of rules, you could say, right, anything that's trusted 8 out of 10 times, or it's come from again, like the Web of Trust. If that JSON packet's signed by someone that I trust,
Yeah,
then I'm more likely to believe that. I think a lot of this base has been solved already, but in different sectors. So it's just a case of picking the right bits and sticking them together, in my view.
yeah,
But
you're
part
right. Yeah,
of the
it's
roadmap
never
is
going to be one thing.
part of the roadmap would be some sort of machine learning as well to see, based on the data coming in, you could try and build some patterns. But again, I wouldn't trust any of these patterns 100%. I would just feed it into somebody gets notified, or the price of destinations that they're going to get reduced or something, to limit people. Unfortunately, we have to build systems like this because there's always somewhere out there to make quite a lot of money in quite a short time.
Yeah, it feels like it's never going to be one solution. It's always
No.
going to be a mixture of everything, including at some point you have to just think about managing some kind of blacklist yourself. Then you got SentryPeer informing you. Then you got the store
Yeah, and
shaken
that's what the
certificate.
CrowdSec guys were telling me. They said a lot of their users are e-commerce websites. They can't just block IP addresses because they might be
Oh
behind
yeah,
carrier grade NAT, or through a phone, or it's a big company trying to buy something. They would rather know that it could potentially be fraud, and they act on that rather than just blocking that transaction completely.
so you'd be you'd have a score that says if it's at least 6 between the various sources, then this is probably spam. Or even store shaken honestly has 4 levels of verification, so it's not like it's
Exactly. And
black
and
and white. It's
and the views that we were talking about were things like that, where if that IP address or that phone number is being seen by 20% of the nodes, then it's more than likely going to be something that's going to be used, or you shouldn't trust it. If it's just seen on one of the nodes and it's a brand new node that's never contributed anything before, then that gets a much scarier weighting because it's probably just someone trying to pollute things. So there's loads of clever ways to do it.
well,
But yeah, there's
Gavin,
some good
it's
stuff.
I mean it's some really good stuff, and I think this is going to be very important going forward in the future with telephony in general, because there's so much going on in the space of robocalls and high throughput dialers, etc., that you really need to be as seeing it start scans. And I think I've seen scans in below 2 minutes at this point. It's just insane. So you do need to handle it somehow.
It's quite
And
interesting as well because some of them are legitimate companies trying to find what's on your network so they can report to it. You know, like what was it?
yeah, but I mean, it's legitimate because they're not too malicious. But honestly, you have
Shadowban,
no business.
that group. You know, they're the ones that try and see what's going on, and you'll see if you run a website. You know, you'll see all the search engines. So there's a lot of search engine type systems like that. But yeah, the next stage would be interesting to build this type of machine learning type thing, add in some other protocols like maybe web SMTP or something, you know, to build up different agents. But that's somewhere where I'm going. It should be good.
Good. Well, Gavin, thank you so much. Again, it's some super good stuff, and people go look up SentryPeer, SentryPeer.org. I assume Gavin will be happy to help people out. You probably welcome contributions because we all do, and it's a very interesting project, and it's going to help you a lot, especially if you're starting out, because I've seen this being reported as when I talk to people from the community, just learning telephony, etc. Aside from SIP is hard, the second thing I hear is, but my server is being attacked after 5 minutes. Yes, it is. That's just reality at this point. So the only way we have to keep going is find solutions like this. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for your effort from all the community, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Luca. Been a pleasure. I'll speak to you somewhere online.
Yeah, we'll see you maybe at some conferences. We have actually have an early bird going on for ClueCon. It's going to be in September in Chicago, October. They'll kill me for this. October in Chicago, and from the 20th to the 25th. And there's an early bird going on the website, so go check out ClueCon.org. But anytime, anyways, if anybody wants to join us in Chicago or anywhere else, I'll be around. I started to travel again, which is fun. It's a
Excellent.
good thing.
And don't
Cool.
forget
So,
about Software Engineering Radio podcast because there'll
oh,
be
thank you. Do you have a
that,
URL for that, or is it on
yeah,
Spotify?
se-radio.net.
Fantastic. So yeah, I'll go check it out right after. I mean, I have to hear about curl and it being on Mars because that's something.
There's some really good topics and it
And
explains lots of good stuff. It's good. It's good hosts we've got.